Hey everyone, so I attended Gencon this year, and while I was there, I managed to pick this up, the new 2024 D&D Players Handbook. Each day they sold somewhere around 700 copies to those lucky enough to get a ticket, and I just so happen to be one. So this is an unsponsored review. I paid for this product with my own money, and I've spent the past few days checking it out, so let's take a look and find out if this thing is worth picking up or if Wizards of the Coast rolled a double crit fail. Let's start with what I really like. This book is very accessible to new players due to how it's structured. Unlike the 2014 Players Handbook, which includes a short introduction to gameplay before going directly into character creation and then has the rules in chapters 7 through 9, the 2024 Players Handbook, or PHB for short, lays out all of the rules in chapter 1. This includes rules on D20 rolls, now called D20 tests, as well as rules on skills and abilities, social interactions, exploration, and combat. This ensures players have a solid grasp of how D&D works before getting into character creation in chapters 2 through 5. And those are laid out in a logical, easy-to-follow way a player would naturally take when building their character. Chapter 2 lays out the steps. Chapter 3 presents the character classes. Chapter 4 is all about character origins, including backgrounds and species. Chapter 5 includes feats. Chapter 6 includes equipment, weapons, and armor. And finally, Chapter 7 presents all of the spells available to spellcasters. It's logical, it flows, and it just works. There's even a character sheet presented to let you know exactly what to fill out when, with some easy-to-understand numbering. Other ways in which this book is beginner-friendly include how the classes are presented, including a chart showing the complexity of the different classes, though it has ratings I might not agree with, like having the fairly simple Barbarian and highly complex Wizard both rated average complexity. However, the guidance is welcome nonetheless. There's even a chart suggesting standard array placement for ability scores for each class. Speaking of classes, they also feel welcoming. The core traits of each class are in an easy-to-understand box. The level chart from the 2014 edition is still present, and class features are presented in the text by level, making it easier to know exactly what you get when. Spellcasters like bards include spell lists by level, making spell selection compared to the 2014 Players Edition book much easier. Even multi-classing, which is one of the more complicated aspects of character creation, is presented in a straightforward, easy-to-understand way, especially compared to how it was presented in the 2014 PHB. And something handy for players of all experience levels includes the rules glossary at the end of the book. Rather than having to search for a rule in the index and then flip to the appropriate page, you can usually find the exact rule you need in the rules glossary, along with a description as to how that rule works in the game. This is a wonderful addition. This welcoming layout makes, in my opinion, the 2024 PHB perhaps the most accessible D&D edition for new players ever. Now, that being said, I do have a few complaints with how the book is laid out. Specifically, skills aren't listed in the same section as abilities, and actions you can take in combat are actually listed outside of the combat rules section. And unlike the 2014 rulebook that lists all of the conditions in a single section, in the 2024 PHB to find a condition's effects, you have to flip all the way to the rules glossary. Now, maybe they didn't want the same information provided in two places, but it makes for a disruptive reading experience when checking out the 2024 PHB for the first time. So we've talked about how friendly this book is to new players, but what about returning players? What does this book have to offer them? Well, unfortunately, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There is some new content, namely new weapon masteries and tool options, including some expanded crafting rules. So, for example, weapon mastery is special maneuvers that are paired with specific weapons. The Great Axe, for example, has a weapon mastery called Cleave, which allows you to target an enemy within 5 feet of your original target for a second rolled attack. This makes weapons more meaningful than just their damage die, although I do find it odd that starting characters can only know 2 weapon masteries at a time. You can swap out your weapon masteries during a long rest, but really, did the Barbarian forget how to swing a Great Axe just because they learned how to push someone back with a Great Club? As for tools, each now has a specifically named associated ability score, so no more guesswork on what kind of check to use for each type of crafting task. Each tool also gives examples of how it may be utilized, plus items you can craft with it. Brewer supplies, for example, let you inspect poisons and alcohol and can be used to craft antitoxins. So, finally, these items have a use. Another big rule change is how characters are created. Race has been changed to species, which honestly makes a lot more sense. While different species give traits one might receive through heredity, they don't determine ability scores. Those are granted by backgrounds, emphasizing how your character's past has forged their strengths. It's a great change and makes backgrounds much more important. I'll admit, in the 2014 rule set, I often forgot about backgrounds entirely. One gripe I have with the background system, however, is that starting feats, or origin feats as they're called here, are locked to specific backgrounds. So, for example, if you want your level 1 cleric to have the healer feat, you have no choice but to pick the hermit background, even if your cleric was a noble who learned the art of healing on the battlefield. Now, you can still go pick those origin feats at the higher levels like 4, 8, 12, etc., but at my table, I'm probably going to let my players choose their origin feats and backgrounds separately, which was an optional rule in the playtest materials, but not here. Another odd thing about backgrounds is that, like before, you can take gold in lieu of starting equipment to spend on items, but gold is uniform between all backgrounds, so whether you're a noble or a farmer, you start with the same 50 gold pieces. Unlike the 2014 Players Handbook, where starting wealth differed by class or background. So that covers the new rules. Now let's get into the old stuff. Stuff that people invested in the 5e rulebooks might already own. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it. Most of the content here, though reworked, has been previously published in other 5e books. This reworked material might contain slight changes in wording, small balance changes, and sometimes replaces specific traits entirely to make them work in new ways. And each class also gets a couple of brand new features, but all in all, there's a lot here that hasn't changed all that drastically. Little from the 2014 rule set is thrown away, and a lot is recycled. To see exactly how much is new and how much is old, let's compare the SRD Creative Commons Barbarian and its Path of the Berserker subclass to its 2024 counterpart. I won't go over the full list of Barbarian abilities, but rather focus on what's been reworked, starting with the base class, then working over to the subclass. Starting at level 1, Rage's duration has been increased from 1 minute to 10, and can be extended not just by taking damage or attacking an enemy, but also with a simple bonus action. Like most martial classes, Barbarians also receive their weapon mastery at level 1, allowing them to choose 2 weapons whose maneuvers they wish to use, like the Great Axe Cleave we mentioned earlier. Level 3 adds a new feature called Primal Knowledge, which grants a new skill proficiency of your choice and allows you to use Strength for a multitude of skill checks while raging, like Intimidation. Feral Instinct drops the ability to not be surprised if you raged at the beginning of your turn, and Instinctive Pounce is a new feature that allows you to move up to half your movement speed when entering a rage. Brutal Strike replaces Brutal Crit, exchanging the extra weapon die for 1d10 damage while also allowing the Barbarian to choose different effects to impose against its target, such as pushing them back or slowing them down, with more options unlocked at level 13. Persistent Rage is tweaked to also grant a once per long rest ability to regain all uses of Rage when rolling initiative. Level 19 replaces the regular ability score improvement with an Epic Boon, which, although they're named the same as those in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, have been expanded upon, like the boon of Irresistible Offense seen here. At level 20, Barbarians no longer have unlimited rage, but are limited to 6 times per day. As for the Barbarian Path of the Berserker subclass, it's been slightly reworked too. Level 3's Frenzy has been reworked, so instead of additional melee attacks, you deal extra damage on your first reckless attack per turn, while dropping the exhaustion penalty. Level 6's Mindless Rage is unchanged, while level 10's Intimidating Presence and level 14's Retaliation are swapped. Now, Intimidating Presence can target any number of targets within 30 feet of you, greatly buffing the ability. These changes should give you an idea of how much is actually different between the 2014 and 2024 player handbooks. The intent by Wizards seems to be more about rebalancing than entirely reimagining. And by the way, if you'd like to see a more in-depth breakdown of how each class and subclass have been updated, let me know below in the comments. So that's the Barbarian class. As for the others, we find all 12 from the 2014 edition, along with 4 subclasses for each. This is great for the 10 2014 classes with only 2 or 3 subclasses, but nerfs the Cleric and Wizard subclasses. The Cleric's Nature and Tempest domains are removed, along with literally half of the Wizard subclasses, including Conjuration, Enchantment, Necromancy, and Transmutation. Wizards has stated that any previously published content should be backwards compatible with the 2024 Players Handbook, so theoretically, you should be able to port over your existing 5e Necromancer without too much hassle. Of the 10 classes that had their subclasses expanded upon, those new subclasses aren't really new either. Each class, excluding Wizards and Clerics, includes the same subclasses as the 2014 Players Handbook, and any new additions to the 2024 Players Handbook are tweaked versions from either Xanathar's Guide to Everything or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. In fact, Though the 2024 Players Handbook increases the number of subclasses from 39 to 48, only 3 of those, the Barbarian's Path of the World Tree, the Bard's College of Dance, and the Druid's Circle of the Sea are entirely new. This is a bit disappointing, as it would have been really nice to see any class that needed those additional subclasses added to feature new material instead of work that's been recycled. Speaking of nothing new, most of the species are also reworked, republished content. Most of the races from the 2014 Players Handbook are present, except for half-elf and half-orc. And side note, despite looking, I couldn't find any guidance on making a character of mixed lineage. Maybe I missed it, but it just didn't seem to be there. There are some species that are not found in the 2014 handbook that are included here, specifically the Aasimar, Goliath, and Orc. But the Aasimar and Orc are reworked from the 2022's Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, with very little difference in what you get. The Goliath, however, is entirely reworked to focus on their giant ancestry. Much like Dragonborn, you choose a specific ancestry that grants distinct powers. This is a wonderful change, and I would have loved to see more reimaginings elsewhere. Also noteworthy are the Tieflings, who now derive from 3 types of fiend lineages, affecting both their appearance and abilities. Not present, sadly, are the celestial beast-like Ardlings that were playtested in early content. Maybe they were seen as too similar to the Aasimar, but still. Having at least one entirely new playable species would have been nice. Also worth noting is that the species content is much slimmer than what you find in the 2014 edition. Not only are racial ability scores removed, but some species such as dwarves and halflings also have their subspecies removed, leading to less player choice. You can see just by looking at the difference in the text between 2014 races and 2024 species how much has been cut. Now, most of this missing material is either lore and flavor, but still, what used to be 2 or 3 pages now fits within a single half page. This makes species seem to be less important and less flavorful. Besides missing species and a few missing subclasses, the 2024 Players Handbook also admits the ideals bonds and flaws system, downtime activities, and really any information on the world of D&D itself. For example, even though clerics and paladins are supposed to dedicate their lives to a deity, there's no appendix here listing the different pantheons that they might be able to choose from, unlike the 2014 edition. While it's likely that a lot of this content will find its way into the upcoming 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, it would have perhaps been more appropriate to include here in the Player's Handbook, where players are making important decisions about their characters. Now, despite what's missing, the 2024 Player's Handbook is packed with content, but most of it is reworked rather than entirely new. Out of the material presented here, we have 3 new subclasses, 2 new feats, an entirely reimagined Goliath species, and 10 new spells, and that is it when it comes to new material. The rest is either retooled from 2014 Player's Handbook, Xanathars, Tashas, or Monsters of the Multiverse, and therein lies the problem. If older 5e content is truly supposed to be backward compatible, I would have loved to see Wizards of the Coast let those older subclasses stand as they are, while focusing on presenting us with brand new subclasses and other character options in the 2024 Player's Handbook. This seems like a missed opportunity. Doing that would have made previously published books appeal to new players, while making the updated core books a must-have for experienced players. With this recycling and retooling of older material, however, I have a hard time recommending this book, especially to owners of the 2014 Player's Handbook and Tasha's, as much of the content might be too familiar. And I hope this isn't a sign of what's to come for the upcoming 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual. I hope those books contain truly new content for the player base and isn't just a mishmash of older Xanathars, Tashas, and Monsters of the Multiverse content. But if this book is any indication, I'm afraid that's what we might get. So, would I recommend this book? It depends. For new players entering D&D for the first time, I would not hesitate to recommend the 2024 Players Handbook. It is a wonderful value with enough content to provide you with years of D&D adventures and characters, and can be thought of as a best-of compilation from the past decade of D&D. Things that Wizards of the Coast wanted to ensure were ported over to the new updated rule set. For the existing player base, however, you should not buy this unless you know what you're getting. The vast majority of this content is reprinted and recycled, though it is reworked and rebalanced, so there is that. Still, I don't know if that's enough. Unless you really want the new core rulebooks and don't mind paying to update what you already own, you might be able to just skip this book and keep playing what you already have. Now, I shouldn't undersell that this is a better balanced and streamlined version of 5e, but still, this is more of a remaster than a reboot and certainly not a revolution. If it had more rule updates, brand new subclasses, or new character options, I'd be much more likely to recommend it. But because it's too similar to previously published material, this might seem a bit like a double dip. Moving forward, I would encourage Wizards of the Coast to focus on producing entirely new content rather than updating what exists already to the new rule set. So that about wraps it up. If you have any questions about things I might not have touched on, please ask me in the comments and I'll be sure to answer. Otherwise, let me know if you plan to pick up the 2024 Players Handbook because I am really curious to know your thoughts. Also, please let me know if you'd like to see more of PHB 2024 content or if I should highlight other systems, and if so, which ones. That's it. Thanks to everyone who likes and subscribes, and I'll see you in the next one.